Interesting in our struggle to understand why Jesus preached the way he did. He came with a very different message. And Paul really understood this, because Paul, who were following in his footsteps, really understood that the message of Christ was not the one of power and strength. It was one of weakness and vulnerability. And that's the power that came through there. There was that in your suffering, you become strong. In your death, you are raised from the dead. And this is what Paul preached constantly, was this message of Christ crucified and raised from the dead. It was so hard for the people here to hear it, but he's also reflecting today the struggle of even the first 12 to understand it. They didn't get it because they understood, and their whole society, as we see, was built around strength and power. And Jesus comes along with not strength and power, but the strength comes through weakness. The strength comes through letting go. It's very hard to grapple with this or get our head around this, but even modern psychologists have started to really try to understand this well. For those who are back home at St. Simon's Note, I've been reading this book recently, and as some of you know, I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's called Thinking in Bets: How to Make Smart Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts. And it's a book about, bear with me, it's a book about, the woman who wrote it is Annie Duke, and she's a professional poker player, right? And so what she has figured out is that there are two ways of thinking of life, and the two ways are this. We tend to, and even us preachers, and I would say a lot of Catholic preachers fall into this mistake, is that we preach with certainty. You do A, B, C, you'll get X, Y, Z. Right? That's the way it is. And you do X, you get this. And the problem with that is, it's just not the way life is. Life isn't that simple. Life, if you do A, B, C, you don't typically get X, Y, Z. You get a lot of things, but it's usually not that straight. There's lots of uncertainty, lots of variables. But he said life is much more like, is less uncertain. So in a sense, and she makes this comparison, wonderful comparison, about how the certainty life, what they call system one psychology thinking, is system one. If you do A, B, C, you get X, Y, Z. It's a bit like chess. When you play chess, just so those you might remember this, is chess, there's a certain set of plays that you have on the board at any one time. There is no luck involved in chess. It is all skill. All skill. So whoever wins is the best player. There's no question about it. It's a matter of, you can't say, oh, the wind was blowing and therefore I had a bad luck when that move happened. My horse wouldn't move, or there's no excuse. You can't hide anywhere. It's all skill. Now, on the other hand, she said life is much more like poker. When we think of poker, is that a lot of people say there's no skill. No, there's actually lots of skill. Because here's what happens. You get a set of cards, that's where luck comes in. You get this set of cards. But that's not where the skill comes in. The skill comes in how you play those cards. But more importantly, how you play those cards when other people play their cards. So there's a difference, and it's a very dynamic reality, because as you play your cards, somebody else plays their cards, and they get a different card, and so it's constantly variable. And so it's about learning to play your cards well with all the uncertainty. Well, that's exactly what Jesus is trying to teach his disciples over and over again, is that you've got to look at all this. The difference between the book, and Luke's book about thinking about this, is that she doesn't allow for God's providence. She just says there's only two things in life: skill and luck. I think there's one more, and that's God's providence. God has, and that interplays with us in our life, is that we're called to allow God's providence, but we also need to use our head and think about what is it that the Lord has called us. We have to discern at every variable in our life that one day you're called to do this, the next day you're called to do this. Very different from one day. Why? Because the variables has changed from one day to the next. So that brings us to here, and this wonderful gospel of Mark that he's trying to help his disciples understand that, look, I am the way. Like he would go on to say it, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. But the way, that's what it was when Paul comes along, his whole way is called the way. Following Jesus was called the way. And the way was one of, not certainty, but one of letting go and giving over to Christ. And inside of that, then you learn to play the hand that you got given, knowing that God is always on your side, that you're called to play the best hand possible. Look, that's all great thinking, but what does it mean for us today in our own lives? What are we called to? Well, I think we have to be careful of thinking the system one thinking. And we have to be careful as modern day disciples to not be telling other people in system one thinking. Life as a Catholic Christian is not black and white thinking. You aren't good or bad if you do this or that. It's not if you, like the whole thing, like if you vote for this person or that person, you're good or you're bad. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. We all have to discern with great careful. We have to be careful discernment. With great prudence, what are we called to do and how we're called to do it in our everyday interaction with those who are our fellow believers, but also those who don't believe at all. We're called to witness to the love of Christ. And that's what the letter from James is all about. He keeps on hammering away. Like, it's one thing saying one thing, but if you weren't a witness to love in our lives, then he says, your words are empty. And he pounds away at this and tells them, look, you're better off saying nothing. Better off saying nothing than to say something and not be the witness of love. So James is very much like an apostle. He wasn't around with Paul, but he very acts like Paul, with great sort of like compulsion and great certainty. This is what we must do. And so when we go home, I'm hoping that part of what we learn here is this sort of conviction that I don't have all the answers. And because we've gone away on a trip like this, doesn't mean we have more answers than anyone else. But what we can do is with humility say, I've come to understand Christ crucified a little bit more. And that I testify by my not by only my words, but by actions of kindness. So if anything, I'm hoping that when we come back from here, that during this, that we'll end up being just a little bit more understanding, a little bit kinder, a little bit gentler, a little bit more loving and forgiving to others who we don't agree with, who are on the different spectrum, whether political or socioeconomic or sociopolitical, and that we witness to that love, to not only those who don't agree with us, but also those in our families who maybe have fallen away, who don't know Christ. What other better way to witness to Christ other than being more loving and more kind? That's our goal, and that's what Paul wanted from those who heard him, not to be distracted by eloquence, but to only focus on Christ and his love for us and our call to love one another.